So some of the challenges that we're thinking about are in supply chain. We're at DOT. I led a lot of the work for the Secretary's supply chain task force in the pandemic, clean tech and climate, very existential threat, in many ways, robotics, compute, transportation. And so really looking at these verticals where there's exponential solutions required. And so Futureland is really focused on finding those bold entrepreneurs or creating those transformative breakthroughs in AI and deep tech.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be your host for the VC 10X podcast. And today we have Mitchell Kominsky with us. Mitchell is an early stage investor, technical startup founder, and former senior government official. As the founder and general partner of Futureland Ventures, Mitchell invests in transformative AI and deep tech startups. Futureland has been investing in visionary founders building novel solutions for difficult problems such as compute, supply chain, climate change, transportation, IoT, and robotics. In this episode, we talk about Mitchell's story and how he started investing, how Mitchell's past experience in government and policy gives him an edge in spotting opportunities early. They're focused on AI and deep tech startups. How does the government think about technology policies that foster innovation? How Futureland gets allocation in competitive deals, and lots more. So, without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. This episode is sponsored by my own podcasting agency called Podcast 10X, where I help VCs start and run their own podcast. While I was running VC 10X, this podcast that you're listening to right now, I asked my VC guests, why don't you start your own podcast? I mean, it's the best form of marketing for VCs. As they say, VC is a people play more than even a capital play. A podcast enables you to put your people at the front, your portfolio founders, your partners, and co investors. It's a great way to build a brand and win competitive deals. It activates all your marketing channels in a single shot, be it YouTube or blog post or newsletter or social media. Everything gets activated in a single shot. And I get the same response from all the VCs that it's a lot of work and we don't have the time for it. I said, all right, let me handle the work for you from pre recording, editing, publishing to making social media clips. All you have to do is show up on a call, hit record, do the recording using the well researched outline we provide you with, and you're done. We handle everything else. You know what they said? All right, let's give it a shot. So if you are a VC and want to up your marketing and branding game, I'd love to work with you. And if you're thinking there are too many VC podcasts already, remember there are way more VC firms out there. And if you're not standing out, you're losing out. So if you want to work with me on starting your podcast, go to podcast10x.com and book a call today. I'll add the link in the description and show notes below. Look forward to working with you. Hey, Mitchell, so good to have you on the VC10X podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Prashant. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you on. And to start things off, can we first have your story and a little bit about your background?
Of course, my background is a bit unique in venture. In terms of my career, for the last 15 years, I've been at the intersection of technology, startups, and government, and it's really influenced my perspective as an investor. I began my career as a congressional investigator, working on a number of high-profile national security issues and that included work in Mexico all the way to Afghanistan. And then along the way, I picked up cryptography, became a self-taught programmer. So it's really developed a number of different perspectives in that line of work. And then I later would serve as an executive at the U.S. Department of Transportation, where I worked on automated vehicles and emerging technologies. And then as an operator, I actually incubated a startup idea at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, spun that out, moved to New York City, where I became technical co-founder of a smart city platform, which developed a community of about 7,000 different organizations that were working to accelerate smart city projects, things such as the Hyperloop and things that were pretty cutting edge in infrastructure and beyond. And then from there, started to started to angel invest, and that led to the creation of Futureland Ventures.
Totally, that's a very interesting story. Moving from a government background and working on futuristic technologies, and then moving to angel investing. So, did you always have an inclination towards startups? How were you attracted to this world?
Absolutely. So when I first started on Capitol Hill, I mentioned working on cybersecurity. I actually authored a few pieces of legislation that became enacted into law. And one of them was called FISMA, which is essentially governing federal information computer systems. So I was starting to work on this back into 2010 or so. And we are already starting to think about artificial intelligence. And we actually labeled it and trying to come up with diction for that. We looked at real time monitoring and a few different sort of systems. But at the same time, I had always felt an entrepreneurial itch. And so I had started to advise startups. So I've been actually advising dozens of venture backed startups for the past decade. And one of them, which I was an early advisor, Fiscal Note, they recently became public about a year and a half ago. But it's something as, as a builder, someone who's an operator, there's certain when you have an idea and you want to move forward, that really kind of actually, going back to becoming a self-taught programmer, I really did that so I could build a lot of the projects. But I absolutely love working with innovative startups that are trying to change the world, and that's a big part of what we do at Futureland Ventures.
Absolutely, that's amazing. And uh, talk more about the kind of angel investing you did previously, and now what you're planning to do at Future Land Ventures.
Absolutely. So the angel investing that first started out at really was starting to think about this thesis about what's going on with technology and companies having an impact on the regulatory side of companies on societal behavior in our infrastructure. And so I've made a few investments, in that category, and that started to really Futureland really was more than a venture capital firm. It's an ethos. And the genesis of Futureland was really pretty organic from my background and network in Silicon Valley, New York City, Washington, D.C. I was working with a lot of friends who are founders who needed help to work on their product, fundraising, everything in between. And so it really became sort of this very natural progression to venture capital where I had access to a lot of really incredible founders and networks. And I was trying to think about a way to capitalize on that. So Futureland Ventures is what resulted. And Futureland is a venture capital firm with 591 LPs. Our LPs are primarily come from family offices, tier one investors, some funds of funds, and various high net worth individuals that are in the policy space or executives at Google, X, PayPal, and beyond that. So we have a pretty interesting range. And at Futureland, we're really focused on challenges, not just problems. So I think that's something unique that we do is we zoom out, look at the entire picture, and then think about, seeing the market and what opportunities are out there and trying to look at it. So some of the challenges that we're thinking about are in supply chain. We're at DOT. I led a lot of the work for the secretary's supply chain task force in the pandemic, clean tech and climate, very existential threat, in many ways. Robotics, compute, transportation. And so, really looking at these verticals where there's exponential solutions required. And so, Futureland is really focused on finding those bold entrepreneurs or creating those transformative breakthroughs in AI and deep tech.
Totally, totally. That's super interesting. And since you have an experience working in policy and on regulatory matters, how does that help you find opportunities and opportunity areas earlier than others can spot them? So, what's your edge there in finding these startups?
Absolutely. I think it's a variety of things, but starting at the top, having that unique, holistic, interdisciplinary perspective really gives that ability to see the entire map, right, of what's going on in that startup from that individual having a founder thesis to, of course, our thesis overall, which is investing in companies that are creating a more sustainable, connected, and resilient future, and then thinking about how they're going to change behavior in society. That's really something that's very key to how we're thinking about that. So one thing that really helps to give us an edge is our network. We've developed this critical network of researchers, scientists, technologists, policy experts, and that really gives kind of a range of different perspectives to be able to analyze what's going on in the market, what's going on with the development of technologies, and what are the challenges there. And so at Futureland, one thing that we really pride ourselves on is working with entrepreneurs and companies in markets where there's a high technical barrier of entry. So that's something that's very important across our portfolio and how we're evaluating companies. And to give you a couple of, just a sense of some of the couple of companies that we're working with and how we're working with, and it is a company, for instance, called Intramotive, which recently announced their $14.4 million Series A round. And kind of taking a step back, how we thought about that opportunity is in my background at the Department of Transportation, I knew a lot about that world and a lot about supply chains globally and kind of some of the macro trends going on. And at the same time, that network is really fundamental in being able to understand what's the opportunity, what are the barriers. So one of the ways that we did diligence on this company is that a former colleague of mine had left the Federal Railroad Administration, and so talked to him and went through what are the challenges here, what's the opportunity, and what are the things about what this company is doing. It's really special in that market. And for this particular case, this was doing battery electric self-propelled freight rail cars, which is really exciting in the industry for a lot of reasons. But when we looked at it and talked about it with our network, one of the things that we really liked is that there weren't going to be dramatic changes to the regulatory structure to be able to be successful in that world. And at the same time, I think at the other end of the spectrum, after we invested in Intramotive, we're able to connect our companies to people can help in these areas. And we really see AI and deep tech having more increased there's opportunity to work and navigate regulatory and government systems, these opportunities. And so we have this network on the other side of supporting our companies where we're able to, for Intramotive, for instance, we're able to connect them with a former member of Congress who led the subcommittee on rails and various corporations such as AECOM and so forth to help them advance their efforts. And I think another company kind of talking about the trends of how this background in policy, regulatory, being an operator gives us unique ability to see and evaluate companies. So another company we're very excited about is called Impossible Metals, which is harvesting, basically building a fleet of underwater vehicles to harvest the sea nodules in the bottom of the ocean. And one of the ways that we were looking at this company to begin with, and we found them before many other investors, is that because of my background, I was familiar with this very little known entity called the International Seabed Authority. I also was aware that they were moving towards regulations. At the same time, you had this other major trend, right? That electric vehicles are becoming more popular and increasing purchasing from consumers. And as a result, there's going to be more global supply necessary, while one sovereign country has traditionally dominated, that perspective. So you have these different trends that are coming together. And so we looked at the team and CEO Oliver, and we just thought they were doing something very special, non-consensus. And through sort of that regulatory and policy lens, we were able to see and identify that company.
Absolutely. That's very interesting insight there that since you're so connected with how the policies are being made and uh, all the regulatory framework that you get to know of these relatively unknown areas where there are massive opportunities that are lying there, right? And that's
Mhm.
awesome. So you mentioned about you're focused on investing in AI and deep tech startups, right? So what do you think will be the role of AI and deep tech in tackling large scale complex problems such as supply chain, compute, and climate?
That's a really fantastic question because I think that's where the future is headed. And traditionally, AI had been a subcategory of deep tech. What we see as occurring is that AI is still very closely related into deep tech. Is a deep tech is a part of that, but it's also separating its own category. So I think the way that we're looking at this and going back to how we think of these challenges that exist that are requiring exponential solutions, software is going to be important. We've invested in software, and AI and is software in many forms, of course. But I think what we're seeing is now two verticals. So deep tech is becoming its own space in AI. And I think what's going to be really powerful to create these transformative solutions to solve things such as direct air capture and some of the supply chain issues that we're dealing with, and can go on, right? And making our streets less congested and safer is the connection between AI and deep tech. And so think we're seeing this, in the founders at Futureland that we're investing in are really thinking about these very hard problems and how to solve them in a pretty novel way. And we can say the word non-consensus, but I think that's really a great way of how we approach this, is since we're investing primarily at the pre-seed and seed stage. And so there's a couple companies that I think are doing really exciting work that are reflective of this. So a couple years ago, through my network, I met CEO of Delos, Kevin Stein. And one of the things I thought was very exciting about what Kevin and Delos was doing was that they started out, just by way of the founders' backgrounds, of doing a space company. And so as they learned more about that, and these are really smart, individuals who have amazing pedigrees, from that area. But so what they were trying to do is map and predict wildfires, at, as close as to 100, percent in no loss ratio. And so what ended up happening is they continued to work at this and notice this even bigger problem that in California, of course, they're living, in the Silicon Valley area, and that wildfires were continuing to occur. At the same time, traditional insurers, were moving out of that market and not even selling policies. So as a result, you had all these homeowners in areas, some that were more likely to potentially get hit, be impacted by wildfire, and some that traditionally would have very little to none chances of that, but they weren't having that opportunity, and that was affecting home prices and a lot of other things in terms of overall local economy. So what Delos and Kevin, and his team ended up doing is that they created an insurance company. And so they're actually starting to, a lot of those companies, insurance companies, ran away. Delos, their model has been so successful so far that they've sold 17,000 policies to homeowners in California that were not able to get this type of insurance from a traditional, and they've had a lot of success in terms of their ability to map this. So I think that's kind of an interesting, where a lot of people would have looked at this and said, well, how can that work? And ultimately, because you have a bold entrepreneur who's thinking outside the box and doing something a little bit differently. On another company that's in our portfolio is Lemurian Labs, and CEO Jay Dewani. He is a former worked on AI at NASA and range of other areas. And so we really are thinking, a lot of our founders are high, not only, if they're not PhDs, they're highly technical in some capacity. So Jay has been thinking about the AI compute problem and trying to use a novel form of math that he and his co-founder have been working on. And so they're actually realizing kind of the interconnected nature of a lot of these markets. So compute with energy, and you can even go into other markets too. So this is a very complicated problem. And so what Jay and Lemurian Labs teams is setting out to do is trying to create more AI that can be more sustainable and more affordable, and so that it can help unleash a lot of the AI compute power, but also deal with some of the natural problems of energy consumption in the process.
Right, those are some amazing set of startups you just shared there that you've backed. Good to learn about all of them and all solving very important problems. And now let's talk about how do you get access and allocation in deals, because I know for a fact that you have gotten access to some really competitive deals of startups that are now doing very well, right? And when startups are doing very well, they are always flocked by VCs, brand name VCs, and all of that. So how do you get access to such deals?
That's a great question, Prashant, and I appreciate the kind words. Fundamentally, it's network and reputation, but it goes a lot deeper than that. So on the network side, because of my unique background, having been a congressional investigator, been working leading emerging tech policy, it's U.S. Senate at the U.S. Senate leadership, and all these range of being an operator, it really gives kind of a unique network, and that's kind of, I think, the real fascinating thing. Is that we receive deal flow from my alumni associations, but also at the same time, people in the policy world. Going back to Lemurian, we were introduced to them by a friend in the technology policy world. So I think Axis is really about kind of your network, but also going trust is a big part of that. And so in allocations, really think about, if I were this founder, what would be helpful to me. And so for the first part is, we're helping founders before we're making investment decisions. And that's not a quick, an exchange, right? It's more of that, we going back, that Futureland has this ethos. We're really trying to help and support the most innovative companies, especially in AI and deep tech, change the world. So we're helping these companies before we even make investment decisions. At the same time, we're very transparent of what we are. And while our checks, are and seed rounds are, we don't lead rounds, so we're not the biggest, check in the round. But typically, we're trying to we have a smaller portfolio so we can be more concentrated and help them in a lot of ways. So it really ranges from helping them introductions to former members of Congress, state and local government individuals, people in the policy world, but also from my smart city background, there's a lot of people in the construction and built world. So we really have this interesting range of introductions we do. We're also very active in co-investors and partners with a number of tier one investment firms that we help source deals with, and really in helping with business, technical talent with some of our companies. And at the end of the day, it's kind of that reputation and getting allocation, is that we want these founders to know that we are there to support them, no matter what happens. And so when Silicon Valley Bank crash happened last year, we had reached out to all of our founders, make sure everyone was okay, did anything that we could possibly do to help out. So I think it's really kind of being understanding the art and science of it, is understanding what each company needs and how to help them, because they're at different places and need different things. But at the end of the day, it's really about that empathizing and understanding the challenges that they're going through on a daily basis, and how can we help move you to that next level. That's our goal.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's a very crucial aspect there. That how do you understand, or the founders communicate that what is something that they need help with? So how does that part happen? Are you like actively keeping track of how the startup is doing, moving? Is there active reporting happening, or is it more of a proactive approach? You ask the founders that, okay, do you need help with anything? We are here to help. Or is it more like a reactive approach where founders say, okay, can you introduce me to someone who is working in this department? And you have, okay, I know someone, right? So which way is it?
That's a great question. It's all of the above. What were some of our companies, and going back to being in art and science, all of our founders have different overall personalities and different ways that they like to operate their company. Some founders want to be investors to be more hands-on. Some want you to be helpful with A, B, and C, and time appropriate. So we do get updates from our founders, and some of them are on a monthly basis, and some of them are quarterly, and some of them, I will text and or call, founder up, and we'll go through what's going on with their company. At the end of the day, it really is a communication process, right? So I'm proactively, meeting people in the ecosystem who could be helpful to our founders, and of course, in making introductions. And then at the same time, when our founders come to us and say, could you help us make this customer intro, or this intro to this person in who has understanding of this technical knowledge, or someone who's formerly in the government who understands this space. We really do all of the above, and I think that's something that sets us apart from a lot of different firms. But at the end of the day, I mean, we're really, it's very subjective. So each company has a different point of view. But we're that's one of the things we really pride ourselves on, and I think that's something too. Going back to is we connect our some of our founders to each other, and we actually in the diligence process we encourage companies that we're evaluating through diligence to reach out to founders of our companies to see how and if we've been helpful, because that's really going to be an important measurement of how we're working together.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great practice there. And so you have been involved with the government in working with them to build technological policies, and so how does the government really think about technology advancements and making policies around it? What's their approach to it?
Yeah, so at a high level, the government has, and I'll talk about the federal government, but this applies to the states too. The federal government has been igniting innovation for decades, if not centuries. You go back to funding ARPANET, which is fundamental, of course, to the internet, and even more recently, as 20 years, some examples that don't always get thought about, right? But are very have been critical in some of the development of these technologies, including AI. Is, for instance, the 2004 DARPA Grand Challenge, which was first initiated to spur interest in the development in autonomous vehicles. And one of the fascinating thing from that particular government program is that in 2004 no team, it was a bunch of teams from, I believe, Carnegie Mellon University and a few other universities focused on robotics. And no team finished the course. And I believe the most successful vehicle went about 7 miles. Now, fast forward 20 years later, you have autonomous vehicles operating in many cities across the country. That's really remarkable when you think about it. Tesla all over our roads, right? That was subsidized by the government, despite what people may say in retrospect. So, and that was a very important innovation in a lot of ways. And also when you talk about government and fundraising, with government and technology, government operates at a different pace, thinks about these things at a different pace. But one other thing that I think is really interesting as a startup investor, and where we look for some of our startups are in this, is the grant programs. So a lot of times people, when they're thinking about government and startups, it's regulation and trying to navigate this stuff, and government's getting in the way. But it's actually much more beyond that, that's much nuanced. And so the SBIR program every year provides grants, non-dilutive grants, about $4 billion to 400 to, I believe, 4,000 companies, if that's right. And so you think about it, that's kind of astonishing, right? Because you have all these really amazing researchers and scientists that are trying to come up with their ideas, but they're at day zero, right? Or it's just coming out of the laboratory. So this is a immensely powerful tool to help de-risk these ventures as an early stage investor, right? If they're going through a program, have some validation. Now there's a challenge, and of course, some of the startups take on too much non-dilutive money, and that creates some later challenges later on. So we try to look at companies where their companies are working with the government, whether and it's in the National Science Foundation, the Department of Transportation working on AI solutions, or the Defense Department, which is really has accelerated a lot of work going back actually to the DARPA Grand Challenge. And so in the Defense Department, you have the Defense Innovation Unit, you have AFWorks, DARPA, a whole host of these programs, Office of Strategic Capital at the DoD. And so the Department of Defense, of course, naturally is going to gravitate to new technologies that can help the military be successful in its operations. But it's also way beyond that too. And so you see these different government grants helping to help out researchers. And then kind of if you take it a layer down, the government, and you're thinking about policy and regulatory environments, that there's really incredible opportunities. If for instance, when I was at Department of Transportation, we're thinking about exemptions to vehicles being on the road. And one company called Neuro in California, they secured the first exemption to put about, I believe, 2,500 vehicles on the road for testing. And there were certain conditions and attached to that, but the government is actually facilitating this process. At the same time, there's opportunities in these pieces of legislation and regulatory structure. And even going back to a lot of the drones that are more commonplace, UAVs and air advanced mobility, companies like Joby are advancing because there's these regulatory structures are enabling that, and that takes, that could take many years. So this is kind of it's not just someone sees an opportunity and then jumps on it. There's a lot of thought, a lot of technology development, and then when you get to Congress, that's sort of the most challenging because in a issue like AI and AI policy, there's the members of Congress, and I've worked with a lot of them. They are not the most technical, not surprisingly, although more of them are now, which is fantastic. But you have this really enormous gap between policy and where their technology development's going. So it's kind of like almost thinking about the Titanic, right? You have this boat that's headed towards this iceberg, and so the federal government is that this large boat in the analogy, right? You can't move it too fast, but you can kind of move it a little bit to avoid this, and deal and try to deal with some of the challenges. So I think that's going to be one of the big challenges of the government is these technologies such as AI, which are advancing so rapidly, more than ever. How do we close that gap? So there's number of other ways you could really dive into it, but I think that gives a little bit of perspective.
Yeah, it sure does. And that's great insights into how the governments think about all these technological advancements. And like you mentioned, the, the representatives who are there in the Congress, they might not always be the best equipped with the best knowledge on where things are moving, right? But the government also has to some sort of foresight, sometimes even more foresight than even venture capital investors, because they are seeding an
Hmm.
industry probably, like maybe autonomous vehicles or electric vehicles. They have to do their bit before even as an industry, right? So who does this kind of research for them, who finds out that these are the opportunity areas that can tomorrow become big industries?
Absolutely. And you mean the people within the government, or just overall?
So the decision makers, the representatives basically, so they might not have all that sort of knowledge. So is
Mhm.
it the people they are working with who are hired for roles below them who do all this research for them and give them the inputs on this? So how does that work? That's what I want to understand.
Yeah, I think it's really ultimately a partnership, although you won't necessarily hear a lot of the times private industry saying they're meeting with the government, but that's really behind doors, and that's really a crucial factor in a lot of these discussions of having you know candid conversations about what is the challenge of technology, where it's going, and steps in the process. So I can give you one example and go a little bit deeper to your question, is that it's really a range of people. And so when I was first starting to work on cybersecurity matters and legislation, um, the industry was not nascent overall, but it was starting to just begin that knowledge and development in government and private sector beyond just cybersecurity firms. So we would meet with a number of companies. I'm not sure I can say the names, but this is about 2010, meeting with companies talking about the cloud. And if you go back in time, at that point, the cloud was a little bit of a meme in terms of what the cloud was, and then, but if you kind of go through these steps, and I think AI is going through this right now, is one of the questions that decision makers will ask on both sides, especially the private sector, is what can we do to make this safer, more efficient, but also not hamper innovation? So they're looking for flexibility and starting to percolate and think about the issue. So as cloud was becoming more prevalent, cybersecurity incidents were starting to increase. So a lot of these key decision makers were thinking about, well, how do we enable this innovation without stifling it, while making sure that it's still secure and safe? So the some of the cloud providers were working with security protocols that were in place. And then in terms of the policy, one of the things that happened is NIST, which is a government agency that's thinking about technology. And there's a few, actually. It's not the government, federal government is not just all bureaucratic. You have pockets that are really developing research labs, agencies focused on very technical things. So it depends kind of where you are. And so one of the things kind of addressing that concern from private industry about being too prescriptive is to create a voluntary framework. So that's generally one of the ways that some of these technologies move forward while they're still developing. What do we know? Where are the problem areas? Where are some of the challenges that or opportunities that we can work with industry? And then once those become a little bit more clear, then you see legislation starting to take form, and that can include the start of development of a regulatory process, which actually Congress will set guidelines for that, but they're generally at the regulatory agency. So when the FAA was starting to do a lot of work on enabling advanced air mobility, companies like Choubey and so forth, that really derived from a law that I believe was around 2012 or 2013 that was setting that regulatory pathwork, saying these are the regulations, and by in 5 years the agency is required to iron this out. So another step in the process. So you have multiple components of the process to actually get from what is this exciting emerging technology and how is it regulated in a safe way that's also creating an ability for these technologies to thrive.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Makes it more clear. And now let's do the last question before we move on to the rapid fire round. And this is about uh, you have been a founder yourself. So how does that help you in being a better investor?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And as part of my identity, I really think of myself as a founder, right? Founding a company, founding a venture capital firm. And so, in terms of how it helps me to become a better investor, it's really that ability to see through the lens of the entrepreneur, to know the ups and downs of every day, trying to ideate, come up with your product, market it, get your first customer, think about pricing, actually collecting from your customer the payment if you're not just doing a traditional SaaS business. And then when the playbook goes out the window, right? What do you do? And these are things that you don't necessarily learn in business school, right? So it doesn't mean someone in business school can't have these qualities, but it's really there's nothing like being in that seat, being able to see that. So I think it also gives you an ability to understand the trajectory of the startup, like are they actually making progress, the meter of are they actually you getting the real story from the founder and getting instincts of that, and then I'll be able to assess having built a company, right? How fast are they really growing, and what's the trajectory in market, and what's their insight, right? Because the way at Futureland we're thinking about this is that we have an overall high level thesis, we have a founder thesis, and then we have a deal thesis. So for founders, we're really looking for people who, for 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 individuals who have a bold vision, are resilient, and either them or their co-founder has, some very strong technical acumen. But at the end of the day, are they going to push forward when things get hard? Because many of the high flying startups that have been very successful, they've all had their challenges. So it really requires that grit, resilience, perseverance, and that hunger. Do they want to will this product or service into the world despite everything being against them? And so that's kind of how we look at founders. And my ability in my startup, we were pioneering a smart city market, which was very challenging, but we had tried to do a few things. So you also think about strategy. As a startup, we were playing with a lot of big corporates, but we're trying to figure out how to get some of those entities to be involved with us. So our team decided to try to create an IEEE standards body to work on the development of the smart city protocols. And so that brought a lot of people together and made our startup authority. So we're thinking about we through the lens of that founder, and what are they doing that's different, non-consensus, or that's going to help. As a VC, I'm focused on power law returns. So how is that founder thinking about building something that's ultimately changing behavior?
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. And
Now let's do the rapid fire round wherein I'll ask you six quick questions about the investing you're doing, and you have to give six quick answers, right?
Okay.
So the first one is, what are the sectors and regions you invest in?
We invest in the United States and Canada if a company is a Delaware C Corp. In terms of our verticals, so we're focused on deep tech and AI primarily in terms of technologies sectors. We're really interested in robotics, compute, energy and climate, transportation, IoT, and security. And so those are areas that we think that there's going to be ripe for exponential solutions.
Got it. And what's the typical stage of investment?
Our typical stage is seed, but we have invested in some pre-seed companies that are a little bit more mature. We don't invest with just the idea on the back of a napkin, but we have started investing in Series A deals and including our own portfolio companies, and we will look at that on a case by case basis. But primarily, we're focused on seed because I think that's an area where we could really de-risk these companies, de-risk the founders, de-risk their products, and also still maximize the returns for our LPs.
Got it. Would do you lead rounds? You don't.
We don't lead rounds right now.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. What's the typical check size?
Our average check size is $100,000. We have written up to a little bit more than $250,000 for a company.
Got it. Where can founders get in touch in case there is a direct way?
The best way, of course, is a warm introduction. But what I can say is we're very much, we understand amazing founders come from Silicon Valley, but they also come from lots of different places, don't have the same type of access and network. So if you go to our website at futurelandventures.com, we have a form that you can fill out as an entrepreneur, ask you a few questions, a deck, and we review every submissions. And also, what I can tell you, if you're an entrepreneur, listening to this, not only do we review every submission, but we have made an investment in a company that came to us directly through our website.
Got it. That's amazing to learn. Last one. Where can our listeners follow you?
The best place is LinkedIn. Just Mitchell Kominsky. Type it in. I forgot my LinkedIn link, but we can add it here to the podcast. And feel free to contact me. Definitely very welcoming. We're really interested in people, LPs and founders, of course, who want to be a part of transforming the future and these innovative companies.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for doing this, Mitchell, and I wish you happy investing.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and really great to be on, Prashant. Very much enjoy your show and, fantastic to be on the pod.
Thank you. Thank you so much.